Okay, so ready to jump into another deep dive. Today, it's the world of psychedelics. We're going to explore their history, their culture, spiritual uses, the whole shebang, from ancient traditions to what's happening now with modern science.
Sounds fascinating. I'm ready.
Awesome. So to get us started, we got your notes here, a couple of research articles, even some historical accounts. What's the mission for today? What's the big picture?
You know, the big picture here is really to understand how these substances that we think of as modern actually have super, super ancient roots, and then how those ancient uses tie into, well, what science is finding out about them now.
Oh, so we're talking time travel and brain science all in one.
Yeah, a little bit of both.
I'm in. This is my kind of deep dive. Where do we even begin?
Let's start way, way back. We're talking evidence of psychedelics being used for spiritual and healing practices like thousands of years ago, long before modern science was even a thing.
Okay, so not just ancient.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff are we talking about specifically?
Think ancient rituals, shamanic traditions. In many cultures, these weren't just seen as drugs, they were almost sacred, like gateways to the divine.
So they were using them to connect with something bigger than themselves.
Exactly. And what's so interesting is that this whole idea of connecting to something larger, even experiencing like ego dissolution, it seems to be tied to how these substances affect a very specific receptor in our brains.
You're talking about the, was it the 5-HT2A receptor?
Yeah, the 5-HT2A receptor.
Okay, remind me again what's so special about this receptor.
Well, it's essentially the receptor that psychedelics, the classic ones like LSD and psilocybin, they activate this receptor. And when that happens, it sets off a chain reaction that leads to something called cortical excitation.
Cortical excitation, okay.
Think of it as like certain parts of your brain getting turned up way high.
Wait, so taking psychedelics is like cranking the volume knob on my brain.
Yeah.
No wonder things get a little strange.
Well, yeah, maybe not cranking the volume exactly, but more like changing the way different parts of your brain are communicating with each other. And it's this increase in activity, that cortical excitation, that seems to be really important for something called neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity, right. And then,
yeah, it basically means your brain becomes more adaptable, more open to change. So it's not just that you're having these wild, crazy experiences. It's that your brain is potentially being rewired in a way that could have lasting effects.
Wow. Okay, so we've got ancient cultures using these substances to have these, really profound spiritual experiences. And now modern science is starting to figure out, like, the actual biological mechanisms behind it all.
Exactly. And this 5-HT2A receptor seems to be right at the heart of it all. It really makes you wonder, like, how did those ancient practices, those spiritual rituals, tap into this specific process without knowing any of the science behind it?
Right. It's wild.
Okay.
But if they've been around for so long, these substances, why are we only now starting to understand them?
Well, there was a period of, suppression in the mid-20th century. You had prohibition, negative perceptions around psychedelics, and that kind of led to a decline in research and acceptance, culturally speaking.
So it's like this whole area of knowledge went underground for a while.
Exactly. But even during that time, even when things were suppressed, there were still people exploring these substances, often outside of, mainstream science.
So like pioneers kind of keeping the flame alive until science could catch back up.
I like that. And you know what? Now we're in the midst of what a lot of people are calling a psychedelic renaissance. There's a huge surge in interest, even within the scientific community. Researchers are exploring potential therapeutic uses for these substances.
So what kinds of things are they looking at? What are they exploring?
Everything. Anxiety, depression, addiction, PTSD. And the early research is showing some really promising results. It seems like psychedelics, when they're used in a controlled setting the right way, can open up new avenues for healing and personal growth.
Okay, so from these ancient rituals to cutting-edge science, it's clear that psychedelics have been a part of the human experience for a really long time.
Yeah, and it really seems like we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much to uncover, so much to learn about these powerful substances and how they impact our minds, our world.
It makes you wonder, what does the future hold for them?
It does. It really does. But for now, let's delve a bit deeper into those ancient practices. What did those actually look like? What can we learn from them?
Yeah, good idea. Good idea. Take us back in time.
All right, well, we're going to need to travel all over the globe because these substances were used across so mmany different cultures. We have evidence of peyote, which is a cactus containing mescaline, being used in indigenous ceremonies in North America. And that goes back thousands of years.
So these weren't just like random events. These were structured, intentional practices.
Oh, absolutely. There was a lot of ritual, a lot of ceremony surrounding the use of these substances in these cultures.
What kind of rituals are we talking about?
Well, it varied depending on the culture and the specific substance, but there was often an emphasis on preparation, purification rituals, setting intentions before, going into the experience.
And so it sounds like they weren't just taking these substances for fun. They were approaching them with a sense of reverence, a real sense of purpose.
Exactly. And oftentimes, these ceremonies were guided by experienced individuals, shamans, healers, people who understood the power of these substances and how to use them safely and effectively.
So it wasn't just about the substance itself. It was about the entire context, the set and setting, as they say.
You got it. And that's a lesson that is so incredibly relevant today as we, look at the potential of these substances, their therapeutic uses. It's like we're rediscovering the importance of those ancient insights. The environment you're in, your mindset, the guidance you receive, they all have a huge impact.
So we're coming full circle, integrating this ancient wisdom with modern science to unlock the true potential here.
That's a great way to put it. It's fascinating to see how these ancient practices are informing our understanding of how to use psychedelics today.
This is already blowing my mind, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I got to ask, were these substances always used in such a, serious context? What about recreational use? Was there any of that back then?
That's a great question. While most of the focus was on spiritual and healing practices, there is evidence suggesting that in some cultures, psychedelics were sometimes used in more social or recreational settings.
So like ancient rave parties.
Maybe not rave parties exactly, but perhaps gatherings where people came together to share the experience to celebrate.
So even back then, people were drawn to the unique effects of these substances.
It seems so. And, we often categorize psychedelic use as either therapeutic or ceremonial or recreational. But the truth is, those categories, they can often blur, especially in ancient contexts.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's all part of the human experience, right?
It certainly is. And as we continue to explore this world, it's important to remember that these substances have a long, complex history, and one that's deeply connected to our culture, to spirituality, even our natural desire to understand consciousness.
I don't know about you, but I am definitely ready to dive deeper into those mysteries.
Me too. And that's exactly what we'll do in part 2. We'll get into the science behind the psychedelic experience. We'll look at how these substances affect our brains and our consciousness on a much deeper level.
I can't wait.
Welcome back.
All right, so last time we journeyed through the entire history of psychedelics, from ancient rituals all the way to the research that's happening now. It's amazing to think about how long they've been a part of, being human. Right?
It is pretty incredible. And now we're going to shift gears a little bit and focus on the science behind these experiences. It's like getting a backstage pass to the show that's going on in your brain.
Okay, I like that. So what's the start of the show? Where do we begin with the science?
Well, remember that 5-HT2A receptor we were talking about? That's our headliner.
Right, the one that substances like LSD and psilocybin activate.
Yeah.
But what's actually happening at that receptor level, like when those substances bind to it?
Think of it this way. Your brain is like this huge, massive network of communication, right? And one of the key messengers in that network is serotonin. And serotonin is involved in so many things. Your mood, your sleep, even how you see the world.
So serotonin's kind of keeping everything running smoothly.
Exactly. And then psychedelics come in and they they hijack the system a bit. They bind to that 5-HT2A receptor and they start sending their own signals, disrupting the usual flow of information.
So it's not just about the serotonin itself, it's about how these substances are changing the way it's being used to communicate.
Exactly. And one result of all that disruption is something called cortical excitation. Certain parts of your brain, especially in the cortex, become much more active.
So it's like those areas are suddenly lit up, firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, something like that. And this increased activity, this cortical excitation, it's all linked to neuroplasticity. And that basically means your brain becomes more flexible, adaptable to change. Like those psychedelic experiences are shaking things up in there, creating new connections, opening up new pathways.
Okay, so we're not just talking about having a trip. We're talking about potentially rewiring the brain.
Yeah.
That could have some serious lasting effects. Yeah.
Exactly. And that rewiring, it could explain some of those long-term benefits that people report after psychedelic experiences. Things like increased creativity, being more open to new experiences, and even a deeper sense of connection with, everything around them.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see how those ancient spiritual experiences, how they might have tapped into something real, like something biological.
Isn't it amazing? Those traditions were onto something, even without the scientific language to describe it, and it all keeps coming back to this one receptor, the 5-HT2A.
That little receptor is doing a lot of work. But what about the more specific effects that people report? Things like, hallucinations or feeling like time is slowing down or speeding up.
Those are great questions. And it really does all come back to how psychedelics change the way your brain is communicating. So for example, LSD, it's been shown to increase activity in the visual cortex, which, well, that might explain the vivid hallucinations.
So the part of the brain that processes what you see is getting like bombarded with all this extra information.
That's the idea. And then you have something like psilocybin, which seems to increase communication between different brain regions that, well, normally they don't really talk to each other that much. And that might lead to that feeling of interconnectedness, like everything is, flowing together.
Okay, so it's not just one part of the brain, it's the whole system getting reorganized in a way. And that's what leads to those unique and, well, sometimes unpredictable experiences.
Exactly. And then there's the time distortion, which, that one's really interesting. It seems like psychedelics might be messing with your brain's internal clock, the network of regions that are responsible for, keeping track of time.
So it's like they rewind the clock or set it forward and time suddenly feels fluid.
You got it. And while we don't totally get how it happens, it's another example of how psychedelics challenge the way we normally see reality.
This is all so fascinating. But I have to ask, if they're basically shaking up the brain's communication system, can that be, well, dangerous?
That's a really important question, and the answer is yes, it absolutely can be. There's a lot of excitement about the potential benefits, but it's crucial to remember that these are powerful substances.
So it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Definitely not. They can trigger anxiety in some people, paranoia, even psychosis, especially in those who are, well, predisposed to mental health conditions.
So it's about respecting the power of these substances and, using them in a responsible way.
Absolutely, and that's why set and setting are so important. Your mindset going into the experience and the environment that you're in, they both play a huge role. A positive mindset, a safe and supportive environment, and having experienced guidance, all of that can help reduce the risks and, well, make the experience better, more beneficial.
So again, it's not just about the substance itself, it's about the context.
Exactly, and that's something we can really learn from those ancient traditions we were talking about. They understood that the ritual, the preparation, setting intentions, all of that was really important.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how, history and science are really coming together to help us understand this in a new way. But there's still a lot to learn, right?
Oh, absolutely. We've really just scratched the surface. And in part 3, we're going to explore one of the most exciting areas of the therapeutic potential of psychedelics.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've looked at ancient rituals. We've even gone inside the brain to see how these substances actually work.
And now we get to talk about how this is all being applied in the real world. It's time to dive into the therapeutic potential of psychedelics.
This is what I've been waiting for. We've kind of hinted at it, but let's get into the specifics. What kinds of conditions are we talking about?
We're talking about conditions that have traditionally been really hard to treat. Things like depression, anxiety, addiction, even PTSD. Conditions that, they cause a lot of suffering. And where the treatments we have now, well, they don't always work that well.
Okay, so potentially life-changing stuff for people.
Yeah.
Let's start with depression. What's the research showing there?
Well, you might be surprised to hear that psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, it's showing incredible promise in treating major depressive disorder. Some studies are showing that when psilocybin is given in a really controlled setting and combined with therapy, it can lead to really rapid and significant reductions in those depressive symptoms.
Rapid and significant. How does that compare to, the antidepressants people usually take?
That's the crazy part. Many people experience relief after just one session, or maybe a few. Traditional antidepressants, they can take weeks or even months to really work. And not just that, the effects seem to last much longer.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. How's it actually working, though? I mean, we talked about the brain science, but how does that translate into, helping someone overcome depression?
It seems like psilocybin is doing a few things. First, it might be helping to disrupt those negative thought patterns that are so common with depression, like hitting a reset button, allowing people to see things in a new light.
So it's not just covering up the symptoms, it's maybe addressing, like, the root of the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, psilocybin tends to create this deeper sense of connection, like connection to yourself and to, well, everything around you. People report feeling a sense of meaning again, and that's so important for, feeling good long term.
So it's like it's helping people reconnect with the good stuff, the joy in life that, depression often takes away.
I like that. That's a beautiful way to put it. That sense of connection, of belonging, it seems to be key to the healing process.
Okay, so that's really hopeful for people dealing with depression.
Yeah.
What about anxiety? Any research there on how psychedelics might help?
There is. Both psilocybin and LSD have shown potential in reducing anxiety and not just, general anxiety. They're also looking at how these substances could help with existential anxiety, which is, the anxiety that comes with facing things like life-threatening illnesses or, well, death.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff. How can psychedelics possibly help with that?
It seems like they can help people confront those fears and anxieties in a different way. So instead of feeling overwhelmed and stuck, they can maybe step back and see things from a broader perspective.
So psychedelics are giving them like a new lens to view that anxiety through.
Yeah, exactly. And with that new lens, they might be able to develop a more accepting relationship with their anxiety, even a compassionate one.
That's powerful. So it's not about fighting it. It's about like embracing it and working with it.
Exactly. And that can be so freeing, freeing people from that grip of anxiety and allowing them to really, truly live.
So we've talked about depression and anxiety. What about addiction? That's another one where, the usual treatments, they don't always work.
You're right. Addiction is, well, it's complicated. There's no, magic bullet, but psychedelics are starting to show real potential here, particularly psilocybin and a substance called ibogaine.
Ibogaine. Okay. I don't think I've heard of that one.
It's a naturally occurring psychedelic found in a West African shrub. It's been used in traditional healing ceremonies for a long time. And now researchers are looking at it for treating opioid addiction.
Interesting. So how is it helping people overcome addiction?
It seems like psychedelics like psilocybin and ibogaine, they work on a really deep psychological level. They can help people understand their addictive behaviors, process past traumas that might be contributing to it, and they can help them develop a stronger sense of self-worth.
Okay, so it's not just about like stopping the cravings. It's about addressing the reasons behind the addiction in the first place.
Exactly. It's about getting to the why, and then giving people the tools and the motivation to change that relationship they have with substances.
That's so important. It's like they're rewriting their own story, taking back control.
I like that. And the research is, well, it's pretty promising. There have been studies showing that some people can actually experience complete remission from their addiction after psychedelic-assisted therapy. And others have seen, huge reductions in their cravings and relapses.
That's incredible. It sounds like psychedelics are offering like a real chance for people struggling with addiction.
They really are. And, let's talk about another condition that's really tough to deal with, PTSD.
Post-traumatic stress disorder. That's something that affects so many people, especially those who've gone through some really difficult experiences.
Absolutely. And it can be so debilitating. Flashbacks, nightmares, anxiety. But here's where it gets interesting.
Yeah.
MDMA, you might know it as ecstasy, is showing incredible potential in treating PTSD.
Wait, MDMA? I thought that was, a party drug.
That's a common misconception. While it is used recreationally, MDMA has this really unique way of working in the brain that makes it, well, potentially perfect for treating trauma.
Okay, so how is it working when it's used in therapy?
It seems like MDMA can create this really safe and supportive space for people to revisit those traumatic memories. It creates feelings of trust, empathy, emotional openness, while at the same time it reduces fear and defensiveness.
So it's like they can approach those memories, those painful memories, without being so afraid.
Yeah, that's the idea. It's not about erasing those memories. It's about helping people process them in a healthy way, integrating them into their story without being totally overwhelmed by them.
That makes sense. Is there research to back this up?
There is, and it's amazing. The results from these clinical trials have been really impressive. A lot of the participants have reported significant and lasting reductions in their symptoms even years later.
So hopeful. It sounds like this kind of therapy could be a real breakthrough for people who've been dealing with trauma, for so long.
It really could be. And finally, let's touch on another sensitive topic, end-of-life care.
That's something that, we don't talk about enough.
We don't, and it's something that, well, we all face eventually. Facing your own mortality can be so difficult, so scary. It can make you feel alone.
Yeah, I can see that. And how are psychedelics playing a role here?
Studies have shown that psilocybin can reduce anxiety and depression in people who have terminal illnesses. It can help them find meaning, find connection in their final days, and that can allow them to, approach death with less fear, more acceptance.
So it's like psilocybin is giving them a spiritual lifeline,
Yeah.
helping them through that last chapter.
That's a really nice way to put it. And that shift in perspective, it can have such a ripple effect. It's not just the individual, it's their loved ones too. It can make the whole end of life experience more peaceful, more meaningful.
Wow. That's really something. It seems like with all of this, psychedelics aren't just treating symptoms. They're really getting at some core human needs, the need for connection, for meaning, for peace.
That's a beautiful insight. And as we wrap up this deep dive, it's important to remember that we're really just at the beginning here. There's still so much we don't know about these substances.
But the possibilities are they're huge, aren't they?
Yeah. They are. As we keep learning, as we keep exploring, we might find totally new ways to heal, new ways to help those who've been suffering. It's a really exciting time.
Well, I have to say, this whole deep dive has left me feeling really hopeful, really inspired.
Me too. And remember, while research is important, these substances have been used for healing and spiritual exploration for centuries. There's so much wisdom in those ancient traditions, and now we're starting to connect that wisdom with modern science. It's a beautiful thing.
I couldn't agree more. And it reminds us that, there's always something new to discover in ourselves, in the world. Thanks for taking us on this journey. It's been incredible.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you all for listening.